All right. Well, so I'm Achyuta Adhvaryu. I'm the co-founder of Good Business Lab. And on behalf of everyone at GBL, I'd like to thank you for contributing to our new Thought Leadership Forum, GBL Access, where we are on a mission to provide our growing community with research insights from the field and beyond and drive good business actions. So Shagun, it's really great to have you on. Just for a moment, would you mind introducing yourself and just a snippet about your organization and your work, and then we'll jump right in.
Sure. So I'm Shagun Sabarwal. I am the Director of Policy Training and Communications at JPAL South Asia. I've been here for more than 5 years now. And basically, I have a background in research. I did my PhD in public health from Harvard University. And then I tried a postdoc fellowship, but then I decided that academia was really not for me. But I was still very, really interested in development and really trying to see how I could contribute through my skills in this development community. And I think the evidence to policy space sort of really called to me. And I think the main thing about my work at JPAL is that the primary role or my day job is essentially to see how we can really make sure that the evidence that we are producing is actually getting used. It's actually getting to the decision makers who really should have it. So that's what I do, work a lot with policymakers, donors, and civil society organizations, but also trying to ask the first question as to like, are we asking the right questions? And how do we make sure that there is a sweet spot between what the researchers want and what the policymakers want, and we really get there? So that's the other part of my work. And then, of course, I'm doing pursuing some of my own research as well, which is looking into the ultra poor sort of women households in Bihar, and working with the government of Bihar to scale up the graduation approach. So in brief, that's my background. Yeah.
That was a great summary. Thank you very much. So just to zoom out a little bit, and then we have lots to cover here in terms of your role in particular. But could you say a bit more just for the folks watching out there, the sort of mission of JPAL, your organization, and in particular JPAL South Asia, what things are you out there to accomplish?
Yeah, sure. So I think JPAL is sort of a network of affiliated researchers. Most of them come from the discipline of economics, but also other empirical sciences. And I think JPAL was born with the idea that we need a lot of rigorous evidence on what works and what does not across different development sectors. And I think the whole idea initially was driven to think about using randomized evaluations, using the application of randomized controlled trials and bring them into the social sciences. And I think, but that was maybe the initial idea, but then it very quickly grew into also really thinking about that how do we act as a bridge between what academics are producing and take it to the policymakers and the wider development community. So we have 10 sectors, and each of these sectors like education, health, firms, agriculture, for each of these sectors, we do have sort of a framework, some kind of guiding principles that really think about the critical questions that are still unanswered. And so we do a lot of this work by bringing together our affiliated professors and sort of either policymakers or NGOs to partner together. But then we've been there for more than a decade now, and I think initially a lot of our work was with NGOs, but now we are actually testing sort of solutions with governments together with them. So especially in India, I think we are having a much sort of our influence and reach to especially state governments has really increased.
Yeah.
So that's what I would kind of say.
That's wonderful. And so let me just say on behalf of Good Business Lab and in my career as well, we stand on the shoulders of what JPAL has done, in terms of the pioneering work that has been done to set up an ecosystem where people believe in rigorous evaluation and take it seriously, and the results can actually change policy and make it better and make it smarter. So what we're doing in the firm space at Good Business Lab really is built on that foundation. So, thank you
Yeah.
for all the work that you
No, I
continue.
think that's really great to hear, and I think the vision of our co-founders Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo was really not about just setting up an organization that just does X, but really making it almost a movement that brings along everyone, just thinking about what is the infrastructure that you need if you're a young researcher and you want to try this out. So we like, this is like really what we look for, right? It's there are many different outcomes that we're after, but what you just said is exactly to why I think JPAL was conceived.
Wonderful. So before we jump into the sort of content areas and some of the interesting work that you've been doing in South Asia, and other researchers affiliated with JPAL have been doing, um, I want to sort of ask you about your particular role, which is, I think, a very tricky one. And that is essentially kind of taking these research insights that come out of academic work, which are often arcane and really hard to digest, and making them consumable to policy audiences in a way that actually generates adoption. And I think that, from my little work in this area, I know that that is so incredibly difficult. And there's such little kind of rigorous science or, pathway or framework behind that. How do you actually get these insights? The sort of evidence in a lot of cases is irrefutable that certain things are good, and should be adopted as policy, but we don't see that happening. And so, how do you view your role, and what are some of the major challenges, and what approach do you take at JPAL to solve
Yeah.
those?
No, I think that's a really good question. And I think I just to take a little bit more sort of an optimistic lens, I would say that, we have on the supply side of what research organizations or, organizations such as GBL and JPAL and many other in the ecosystem can provide, like the design of these sort of, whether you want to call them insights or how we put them together, how we synthesize them, how do we make them more than just about one specific intervention. I think we have done a lot on the sort of the supply side, right? And I do think that the field has really moved, and with organizations such as IPA and JPAL really taking the baton on almost kind of producing that to the stage where we now have a lot, like we have a lot more raw material that can at least feed into it. Like back when we started, I think there was very few such sort of rigorous evidence.
Yeah.
But I think now the challenges are more on the demand generation side. So I think, to me, what it seems like is that I feel like even with in India, for example, our prime minister said that yes, evidence-based policy making is one of the agenda items that the Indian government should really adopt. But I think where for it to not just be a buzzword but to mean anything, I think we have to do a lot more in trying to understand how this inflow of evidence actually happens in within the government systems, thinking about its embeddedness, thinking about the implementation challenges. So because even if the ideas are great, how do you actually get to implement it?
Absolutely.
Having said that, I think for some sectors, especially when it comes to say gender or even in case of firms that we're going to talk about, I think there's still a lot that can be done on the design side, right? So I feel like it's really important that even on the supply side, we may know now with certain things like, learning of students and health and some of the answers we do have, but then these nascent sectors where we also need to provide a lot more design inputs. So I would say that I think it is quite challenging, and there are many things, but there's definitely more openness than there was earlier. But we just need to find ways of really making it a lot more tangible to whom we are going, rather than just saying this is a presentation, this is how it works, and then leave them.
Right.
So I
Right.
think just finding ways of how do we get that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's so much to be done in that realm. This conversation brings to mind a couple forays into this work that I'm sure you've seen. Coming, for example, out of Latin America. There's some nice work that tries to look at how do you convince bureaucrats or politicians to adopt certain initiatives or
Yeah.
believe in them. Is it about
Exactly. Yeah.
just showing them the
Yeah.
numbers, or is it about telling stories? And I think there's some really interesting
Hmm.
work to that end. And indeed, it does seem that you need to do much more than just put the numbers out there that X program has a certain rate of return,
Exactly.
whatever.
Exactly.
Telling the story and kind of making it patently obvious that something should be adopted in words that a non-academic audience can understand is really important. Let me ask you one other follow-up on this front, which I think is something that really pertains to a lot of the work that we do at GBL in terms of getting firms to adopt interventions that we've shown via rigorous randomized control trials are successful and can move their bottom lines. We still see a lot of resistance, a lot of kind of organizational, inertia and frictions and that sort of thing to adoption. Um, you know, how much of it is about this kind of hand-holding process and providing a sort of not just the evidence, but also some sort of pathway or toolkit or implementation support to get things through?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really great question. And I think unfortunately that's one stakeholder group that we haven't engaged with so much, but we do want to. I would still say that some of the learning that I have had with when working with say policymakers or your traditional development partners may still apply to the firms sector, where I do think that the first stage has to be trying to make it very incentive compatible. And I think that is where sometimes when we are just trying to push things onto someone but not really trying to understand where their incentives lie, right? And I think that of course for firms profit is important, but I also know that there are many big firms who are really thinking about HR practices, worker well-being, etc. So how do we sort of again marry the two? And we
Right.
may have to do a lot more homework to try to tell them
Yeah.
that these are implementable. How can they fit into their current operations? And if they need to make any big sort of changes, then why is that the case, right? So some sort of such incentives, maybe a call to action, bringing everyone together is what's needed. And I feel like GBL, even with GBL Access, I think this is a role, like you need a convener. I feel we now have a convener with some of these other sectors, right? Whether it's the Bill and the Melinda Gates Foundation, whether it's some of these big donors or the multilaterals. But I think with firms, you have, of course, groups like CII and all of that, but I think we still need a lot more to happen here.
Yeah, no, that's a great point about sort of having a central organizing body to kind of bring all the parties together and make it obvious that there are returns for everyone to be involved.